Listeners, are you ready for your monthly literary adventure? We now have the BFF Book Club. Join us each month to explore a new book. After reading, connect with fellow book lovers and meet the author in a live interview. Can't make it live? Don't worry. We'll send you the recording. You can find all the upcoming book club selections at www.bookishflights.com/read/BFF book club. Hi, I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with E.H. Underhill. E.H. is the author of the Solar Storm Chronicles, New Heroes. He is also a Christian, husband, and father of 3, but to keep the lights on, he draws houseplants during the day. He is from Plymouth, Massachusetts, but currently resides in Central Florida, the setting for his first book. His writings are inspired by his Christian faith and growing up with Star Wars, Marvel, and DC. He is now starting his own superhero universe to give an alternative to the mainstream ones that have been injected with politics and toxic secular values. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to have you on the show today. I know we talked quite a while ago, so I'm like, okay, time to do it now. We're here.
Yep. Excited to be here.
Yes, well, I feel like you are so much more than this bio, so why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Well, like I said, Christian, husband, father of 3, and like I said, during the day I work for an architect and draw house plans, and then, but eventually I kind of, I love my job and all, but you just find that you want to do something else too, and so I probably, got the idea for my book about, I don't know, 10 years ago.
Okay.
And then about 2 years ago, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to finally just finish. Like, I'd always dabbled in writing, but I never really committed to it. So finally, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to get it done. And so it took me about a year and a half to write, and was a fun process.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to ask if you had always been a writer, or because I'm imagining like, okay, you get these ideas, but me, who's not a writer, like I don't know that I would put pen to paper. So it's interesting. So you, even as a child, you were into writing?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I was dyslexic, so I wasn't a big reader. I wasn't a big writer. I did not like school at all, and so yeah, I was very very different as a child. I don't know. It was one of those things, they taught everyone one way, and so I just never really could read very well.
Yeah.
I didn't like reading in front of people. I didn't like reading on my own because I just couldn't. It's hard to focus when you aren't reading the words correctly half the time, and so yeah, I didn't get into reading probably till after I was completely done with school.
Yeah.
Just I guess being forced to read things never really sat well with me, and then eventually, once I was able to start reading what I wanted to read, that's when I got more into reading.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could see where that would be like that was really where your love of reading starts, right? Versus what we're being like, okay, curriculum, you have to read these things. You're like, no, this isn't working for me. I actually had a a reading specialist that was dyslexic herself. She came on, can't think of what episode number now. Gosh, we're almost to 100. So I'm like, they're kind of getting scrambled up in here. But it was so interesting to have her on. And she spoke very similarly, like until she found books she loved, like she really didn't enjoy reading and learning strategies to kind of work through her dyslexia with her
Yeah.
reading.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You kind of have to, I don't know. It seems, yeah, it takes a while, but eventually now I can read, like very quickly. Where back then I just hated it because it just took up so much time. And,
Yeah.
but it's one of those things where you just have to kind of start to practice and figure out, your own way to read.
Well, tell us about, I imagine your days are very busy with 3 kids and a full-time job. And tell us about how you fit writing into your day.
kind of wherever I can. It's very, very busy. I usually get up around 5 a.m. and or 5 to 6,
Okay.
so depending on the day, early before anyone gets there, and write for an hour or more if I can, and then kind of wherever you can find time. My lunch break when I get home, and the kids are picking up and my wife's cooking dinner, and I'll try and sneak some in there. But yeah, it's just kind of figure, wherever I can. And so yeah, makes it kind of hard sometimes to get in a groove, but I do try to stay consistent with doing it. Usually in the morning, a couple days a week.
Yeah. So are you working on the superhero universe project right now? Is that what you're currently working on?
My plan for the future with after the first book is I wanted to also get into comic books.
Okay.
So I have wrote out the first issue for the comic book that would be another superhero inside the same universe. And I've also started writing the sequel to the Solar Storm Chronicles New Heroes. So I
Okay.
got those going right now. The book will probably come out before the comic book, just because to get the comic book illustrated published is
Yeah.
just so much more expensive than publishing a book.
Sure.
Um, good artists are very, very expensive, and rightfully so. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're very talented, but that means it comes with a big price tag too.
Absolutely. And especially I feel like you're probably have what you want your comic book to be like. And so you're like, okay, I'm gonna hold out for the right one and when you can do it the way you want
Yeah.
it to be done as well. Well, tell us about the Solar Storm Chronicles, New Heroes. Tell us about the book. Entice us to read it.
So it takes place in Florida. New Smyrna Beach, Florida is kind of where it starts, or DeLand, Florida, and Smyrna Beach, the two most prominent cities in it, because that's uh, two places that are near and dear to me. I spent a lot of time in both cities, and so I know them very well. So there'll be a lot of details in there that if someone has been here, they'll be like, oh, I've seen that.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where it starts and takes place. And we kind of pick up, when I was writing the book, the reason it took me 10 years to flesh out the idea is I kept on writing the book thinking, I have a very analytical mind. And so I'm trying to start this book explaining to everybody how everyone lives in this world where there's no power and stuff like that. And
Okay.
so the entire first chapter when I started, 10 years ago, was terrible. It was so boring. It's all just information,
Sure.
and you're just like, yeah, that's what kept on discouraging me, because I'm like, this is so boring. No one's going to ever want to read this. So then, about 2 years ago, it just kind of clicked. You don't start when the power goes out. Start months later. The power is already out. You can catch everybody up on that, through the story and in the prologue. But I decided, start right in the action.
Yeah.
And so you kind of start right with the main character, Eric, is being shot at by the main antagonist, Kyle. And, just kind of progressive from there. His friends kind of come to save him right at the beginning of the book there. And that was kind of the main goal for the book. I wanted to be more of a story of a guy and his friends.
Okay.
And just because, most of these Marvel ones, they've become like more about like, this is this guy and the girl that he loves. And I'm like,
Sure.
not every teenager wants to read a love story every time
Yeah.
they read a superhero book. And so I was like, no, this book, I do eventually add a love interest, but it's more about, a guy and several of his friends, who are all based on a lot of people that I've met, in the last several years.
Yeah.
So
So what age would you say, like what age would you recommend for the book?
that's a tough one, because, everyone parents differently.
Sure.
I kind of set it at 12. I think that's
Okay.
that's a very safe age in my opinion,
Yeah.
but it could be younger depending on what your kid is reading. What I compare it to for a lot of people, if they're asking me, because there's no adult content, there's no
Okay.
swearing.
Yeah.
That was very important to me, because I'm writing this for my kids. I
Yeah.
want my kids to be able to read this. They're still a little bit young, but my older one's kind of getting to the age where she could. And so it's very important to me to keep it clean. And so it does take place in a dystopian reality where there's no power and everything. So there's obviously some violence, but the way I put it to people is if you're okay with your kids reading something like Lord of the Rings,
Okay.
which in my opinion is yeah, I love the book. It's my favorite book of all time, but
Sure.
it's very violent.
Yeah.
It's a very violent book. So if you're okay with your kids reading that, then I would say my book
Right.
is right on par with something like that. There is some violence, but it's always a fight between good and evil.
Yeah.
Is kind of where I keep it.
And I'm like so thankful for authors like you who are doing this because my oldest, he's going to be 9 here in a week. And I feel like I'm always navigating like what is appropriate for you and what's not going to introduce themes that we're not
Mm-hmm.
ready to introduce as a family. And like it's a battle that I never thought I would have as a parent, right? Like of just how much time I spend trying to screen the content you consume. And
Yeah.
it's wild to me. And I sit sometimes and think about it. I'm like, I spend so much time thinking about that. And you just can't, I'm like, now he's my oldest. I'm like, what about when my other two start reading? Like, how could I possibly
Yeah.
screen 3
And
books for
trying to
3
keep
different
up.
kids? And yeah, like, how do I do
Yeah,
this? So
trying to
I,
keep up with all the new stuff coming out is just. I remember we just had to pre-watch. We were trying to watch Descendants because they came out with a new one, and we're just like, is this safe, or are they putting
yeah,
stuff in here we don't want our kids to necessarily see? And that's kind of one of, like I said, I've had this idea for 10 years, but one of the things that kind of really got me back to writing it was um, just what Disney has done with Star Wars and Marvel. I'm eternally a Star Wars nerd. I've it's been my favorite property since I was a child. I have Star Wars Legos, I have lightsabers, I have all this stuff.
yeah,
And then just what they were doing with Star Wars and Marvel, um, I just didn't. I'm like, I don't, I would not feel comfortable with my children watching a lot of these shows.
yeah,
They don't make Star Wars and Marvel for children anymore, which is what George Lucas said. When everyone was getting mad about the prequels, he's like, these are movies for children. This isn't
yeah,
like, I'm sorry that you adults are upset that you think I ruined your childhood, but these are movies for children.
yeah,
Um, and Disney is not doing that anymore. These are
yeah,
very much movies for adults. I think when it came to the comic books, because people also don't pay much attention to that. It's hard for parents to kind of keep up. It's hard enough to watch all the movies, TV shows, but in the most recent comic books, the Joker and Batman gets pregnant. I'm like, well, I'm not letting my child read
I
that.
didn't even know that. Oh
Like
my
that's a
gosh.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It's gotten wildly out of hand.
And at the end of the day, like we're the gatekeepers of our home. And so I can choose what comes in and out of our family and our home. Again, thank you to authors like you who I know, like I love, I feel like now I've kind of have a couple authors that I know that work well. I appreciate what they're doing. I think it's safe for my son to read. He's a voracious reader, and that's the other problem is he reads so much. So I'm like, okay, this author seems safe. I've read enough of this with you. Like, I think we're
Yeah,
okay. And so that's kind of what I've ended up doing because you can't just possibly consume all the content he's going through. I mean, he reads 3 to 5 books a week over the summer break. And I'm like, I just can't read it all. So,
yeah, yeah. It's I don't know, for some reason it's hard to get them to read some of the older stuff. Everyone wants to read, like, oh, this is the new book that everyone loves, and like, yeah, but it has some stuff in it that it's not good for you.
yeah,
So
I had him into the Boxcar Children for a while. Like he was into that and now he's kind of gotten away from that a little bit. And so again, you're just always navigating. And this is I never imagined parenthood being like this, but it is what it
yeah,
is. So we're gonna do it to, protect our kids and their minds until they're ready to consume other content that are more
yep.
adult themes. Okay, so what did you learn about yourself through the writing process?
It took a lot of discipline. It took a lot of discipline to just sit down, especially after you're done with writing a book. Like, because it's really fun to write a book.
Yeah.
Then you get to the end and you have this book that's, I mean, I think mine was like over 100,000 words,
Wow.
and uh, and now it's like, oh, I can just publish this, right? No, you need to edit it, which is not fun at all.
Doesn't sound like it.
You have other people edit, you have to have other people read it. And so it's like you've written this thing you're super excited about, and now other people are going to tell you what's wrong with it. And not just other people. I put it through a bunch of programs, and I find out, it's just like, here are your crutch words. I'm like, wow, I have a lot more crutch words than I ever thought I did.
Yeah.
Which I didn't even realize I used. So yeah, it just takes an enormous amount of discipline to get through it all. And through the entire time I'm doing this, I'm also trying to get back into working out. So like the whole theme of the last couple of years, 3 years of my life has just been trying to build discipline. I get up at 5 a.m, and I try to work out, then go to the office, write for at least an hour, go my lunch break, write for another hour, and just you gotta make yourself do it, because it's really easy to just be like, oh, I'll just do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
I think this is lessons I'm, trying to teach my oldest. We were just having this conversation yesterday about, well, my 4-year-old happened to ask, what makes a bad day? And, it's like, well, it comes down to choices that we make in our day and how you view those choices. Like, it doesn't have to be a bad day. You could look at it as a good challenge, and just trying to teach them these small little things of, maybe not discipline per se, but just the choices we make affect how our day runs. And so, and to your point of like getting onto that routine, we have to choose to do it sometimes, because it's hard to get up I get up at 5 too. I do the same to have that quiet spot before the kids, but there's times I don't want to get out of bed.
Oh yeah, I a couple weeks ago, I was working out, and I tore my hamstring.
Oh no.
And so I would say the last 3 months I've been very much using that excuse, like, oh, I'm still hurt.
Yeah.
I don't need to get up early. And so yeah, it's really easy to convince yourself to just put it just tomorrow. Just do it tomorrow. It'll be fine. And tomorrow it turns into next week, and next week turns into next month, and next thing you know, you haven't done anything for who knows how long, and the only person you can blame is yourself.
Yeah.
So it's just.
Well, I think it's easy to get swept away in parenthood too, right? With our kids, and they consume so much of our schedule and our time, which is great. And that's what they're supposed to do. But then realizing, okay, I need to put me back in here too, and figuring out those cracks in the day that you can do it. Because by 8:30, my brain is mush. Like, there's no podcast recording. There's no, maybe sit down with a leisure book, but I can't edit really. My brain is mush by that time. So I'm like, I just realized for me, early works better. So I just have to force myself out of bed, because that's when my brain works the best of the day.
Yeah, I kind of made a rule several years ago, basically when we started having, I think once we had our second child, and things get a little more hectic once you have that second one, was I was working tons of overtime, but I always like to do it in the morning because my family's still asleep.
Yeah.
But when 5 o'clock hits, I'm going home, because that's my time with my family.
Yeah. And the kids don't stay up that late. So you got to be here. And that's my husband, I know, has to like sign himself out too to get home to have time with the kids before bedtime.
So. If I'm checking out at 5, it takes me a little while to get home. So by the time you get home, our kids go to bed around 8 o'clock. So I really only have 2 hours a day with kids for the most part. So, and it's hard to, if you decide like, oh, well, I want to do this, or, I can't imagine, I have friends that are like, oh yeah, I go to work out after work. And I'm just like, then I have no time with my kids.
I know. My husband has even better discipline than I do. He gets up at 4:30. So it's a good motivator for me, because I'm like, well, he's already up, so I should get up. But that's his workout time, because that's what he has to do to get to work on time. And then he knows it won't take away from us at night. So he has this family time. So choices. It's all about our choices. So, well, let's switch gears. Let's talk about the next set of discipline, and let's talk about who you are as a reader. So what type of genres do you enjoy?
I like the complete opposite extremes. I am either into sci-fi and fantasy is my go-to. I can read those books at just about any time, because they're fun to get into, they're easy to get into. But then at the same time, I go to the complete other extreme too, with a lot of autobiographies, political books, stuff like that. Where it's funny because you tell me like, here's a murder mystery set in present day, and I'm just like, that sounds boring. But if it's set in, Middle Earth or space, I'm like, oh, cool, I'm on board. Or if it's like, this is an autobiography, by a Navy SEAL who served in Iraq, I'm like, okay, that sounds interesting also.
Yeah. So being analytical of mind, like you said, do you enjoy the world building in the sci-fi and fantasy books?
Oh yeah, I love it.
Okay.
It's one of my favorite things is, I've told, some of my friends and some other people that have come across my book, I'll just sit there and talk for however long they let me go, explaining, how it works, with the solar storms, because I did a lot of research on how storms work, because theoretically, what happens in my book with the solar storms taking up the power, that's actually very possible in real life.
Yeah.
Now, I take it in a sci-fi direction, but it actually is very possible that solar storms. It was funny, right after I published the book, there's actually a bunch of articles about solar flares that could mess up. I think I actually messed up AT&T's cellular signal. And I'm just like, well, that's interesting. But
that's
yeah,
some of the things with these dystopian books, right? Of like how close to reality they could possibly be.
Yeah,
and sometimes we get too close to them as well. Like, oh man.
Yeah, that was kind of important. Is I wanted to, when you're doing superheroes, you have to I want to stay as close to science as I can, and then kind of get into my own pseudoscience that I, make up for the fantasy kind of part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting because I was very into science when I was younger, kind of getting into how solar storms work, how they affect different things, and I definitely put that in the book where it is possible. It could actually happen to us one day where we got hit by a large solar storm, and it could knock out electrical grid for the entire East Coast, or theoretically, if it's big enough, the entire country.
Yeah. Wow.
Our electrical grid actually is built in a way where if you take out like just a few key points, the entire thing goes down. So it's interesting, and yeah, I get really into building some of that, and at the same time, like I said, it takes place in Florida.
Okay.
So I build in a lot of stuff for people who have been to New Smyrna or DeLand. They'll definitely recognize a lot of the landmarks from those cities.
That's fun. I love feeling like I'm traveling through the pages of books a little bit, like learning about these other locations.
I'm actually in the next book that I read now. I take it to Georgia.
Okay.
And a small town there that I actually have some family that lives in Noonan, Georgia, I believe is the name of the town. And then also I have plans to also be bringing it to Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Fun. Okay.
From.
So is it going to be a trilogy, or are you kind of leaving the option open at this point?
It's going to be, no, it's well, I mean, I have a vision of grandeur where I have a lot more than just a trilogy.
Okay.
Planned. If I can get the comic books going financially, the plan for what I'm calling phase one, kind of stealing that from Marvel, is there's going to be 2 books around the character that take from the first book. Book 2, there'll be a comic book that takes place in New York that introduces a superhero from New York, and there will be a comic book that takes place. Right now, I'm leaning towards North Carolina. I'm not sure. I haven't decided. Also, I thought maybe I'll go further into the United States. The problem is I just haven't been off the East Coast a ton, so I don't.
Yeah.
I can't put that little bit of extra knowledge behind it of places that I've been. Yeah. So, but the plan for the third one, because it's, I am a man, so the first one is, based off a character, kind of based off myself and also people that I know. The second one is also based off a friend of mine in New York. And then third one is going to be based off a girl, and that's going to, I was thinking North Carolina.
Okay.
And then there will be a third book. So it's, 2 books, 2 comic books, and then a third book that will kind of bring them all together.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Well, and maybe a family road trip will be in your future. You can take a road trip to
Yeah,
where you might set another book.
yeah, we've been doing that. We got a camper now, so we're definitely mobile. That's kind of why North Carolina's on the mind. Last summer we took a family vacation to North Carolina and stayed up there for a couple days.
Yeah.
So,
That's always in the back of our mind too. Right now we tent camp, but my husband's in the military, so we move a lot. So just dealing with a camper at this stage in the game with moving all the time and logistics of moving that, it's just so maybe one day when we're done with this life and retired
yeah,
from this.
it's fun, but yeah, it's fun when they get older. Like right now, my kids are 7, 5, and 3, so
Okay.
they can't really help with the camper at all. But they love it. They
Yeah.
love getting in the camper. It's just have to watch out a few things. Like, hey, I assume you probably have the same problem with tent camping where you have strings that they
Oh
will
yeah, trip
always
over all the
trip
time.
over. Oh yeah, we put the canopy out for the first time when we were in North Carolina, and there wasn't a day that they didn't trip over the ropes that were holding in place.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's always an adventure, but I camped as a kid and it's some of my best memories. And I feel like it's great for kids just being outdoors and being able to run around. And it's a great vacation for them. And it's pretty cheap for tent camping, at least. So,
yeah, well, it's nice. I'm very fortunate that my kids love going outside because I've met so many kids that all they want to do is sit there on their iPad
oh,
or
yeah.
their Nintendo, and they just the world goes by while they're just playing on their different devices. And I'm lucky where my kids they like watching the iPad, but they also spend a lot of time not looking at screens.
Yeah. I was just reading an article and I don't remember who wrote it but they were talking about how kids don't really have like time to be bored anymore because they're always being stimulated and how we might have picked up an instrument or we might have just doodled in our notebooks and become an artist or wrote in our journal, which made us want to be a writer when we were getting older and how our kids' generation is just not having that time to be bored and kind of play around with different things and see what they might
Mhm.
like and that it made me so sad for them that wow, I mean that could just diminish you finding what creative things really speak to you.
Yeah, I could definitely see that because yeah, as a kid I was big into Legos, Rector sets, all that different stuff, and now that very easily translated into I've been in construction ever since I turned 14. I think is when I got my
Wow.
first job in construction,
Okay.
and I've done everything from sweeping the floors while they're working to actually I've built several houses, and now I'm the guy who draws the plans for the houses.
Yeah.
So and yeah, I was definitely because I learned at a very very early age that I like building things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, another thing with parenthood, right? We have to help to kind of protect our kids to have that leisure time, that truly timed. And like I'm always trying to tell my kids, you just need to be bored. You need to learn how to be bored. Sorry, got to figure it
yeah,
out. So, well, you have also been so gracious to bring a book flight with you today. Can you tell us a little bit about how you chose the books you brought today?
first one is Lord of the Rings.
Awesome.
See that,
Okay.
but that's that was probably the first book that I read that taught me that I didn't hate reading. uh, it didn't happen right away. I think the first time I read Lord of the Rings was in about fourth or fifth grade, and it was just different. I was like, I actually like this book.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm very analytical, and so I know a lot of people have a hard time with some of the Lord of the Rings because if you start reading from the very beginning, there's a lot of information they give you that you're like, how useful is any of this information? But I love that stuff. I like getting
Yeah.
really nerdy sort of stuff, and so yeah, Lord of the Rings was just the first book that I really got into. Um, I think I had to do a book report on something, and they gave us a few options, and that was I just happened to pick that one because the teacher was like, "Oh, I think you really like this,"
Yeah.
just knowing what I was into, and then yeah, now um, I read Lord of the Rings probably at least once a year.
Fun.
Um, I kind of was inspired by it's Sir Christopher Lee, who played Saruman in the movies. A lot of things that something that people don't know. He actually read Lord of the Rings every single year for 40 years before
Wow.
he was in the movies. So
Wow.
he had a lifelong love of that book, and so that kind of inspired me to like, yeah, I should definitely read this book every year. It's my favorite book. I get it very easily, and so yeah, it's just it's an epic adventure with very clear this good versus evil, and I just think it's probably one of the best stories that's ever been told.
Yeah. I've actually been considering because we had to read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings for assigned reading when I was in school as well. I think it was sixth grade, if I remember correctly. And admittedly to your point of when it's assigned reading, I feel like you just kind of get through it to get through it. And I'm like, I really want to go back and reread these now as an adult, as a leisure book, and really dig into it. Because my impetus really for starting the show was to try. I always said I never liked fantasy books, but I've really never read them. And so I'm like, well, what if I start to talk to people about, and they'll bring three books in this genre and they'll come on and then I can try it. Because who can say you don't like something if you don't try it? And
Yeah,
so here we are with Bookish Flights way down the line, but that was really what I wanted to start was because I wanted to know, like, just try these, like sci-fi, another one I don't really read. So that's been in the back of my mind. Okay, when you get time, let's pick up The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings again and
yeah.
go down that
Well,
road.
another thing I love about like the Lord of the Rings, one of the reasons I recommend it to a lot of people is that a lot of people, most people have seen the movies,
Yeah.
and Lord of the Rings, like I have all the extended editions of the movies, so I'm one of those people that would be like, yeah, let's spend 12 hours watching all of them back to back. But one of the things that I enjoy is, and this might just be me, is I like when I read a book that I've seen a movie, and then you're just like, oh, there's so much extra information
Yeah.
that connects things. Like people don't realize the ending of the Lord of the Rings movies. Um, it actually spanned out over years in the books.
Yeah.
You watch the movies and you're just like, oh, they get home, they're
Condensed.
they're somewhat happy, and then Frodo leaves, and that's the end of it. It's like, no, there's a whole storyline that people don't know about from the end of the books about what happens to Saruman, what happens to different. They wrap up a lot of the characters that you're just like, oh, well, I like that character, but then we just kind of left them and nothing ever happened in the movies. Well, if you read the book, he ties up almost everything in the book.
Yeah.
So it's fun to read that and kind of be like, oh, well, that's a good ending. I'm glad that person got a good ending. I'm glad that bad guy kind of got what he deserved,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. It's fun. I find it fun
Yeah.
to be able to get all that extra information.
Well, I think that's where the like people will just say, "Oh, I preferred the book," because you do lose out on these details, right? And that's where I think they get a bad rap sometimes with the movies. Like, okay, well, they cut a lot of this stuff out. Where I feel like in the books,
Yeah,
you have the time to spend to give the details and tie things up and all of that.
yeah,
So, well,
yeah.
what?
And then there's just characters you don't know about, and they're just like they left that. As a reader, you get mad sometimes. Like I
Yep.
can't believe they left that person out. And I know me and my wife got so mad because we reread all like the Harry Potter books, and we're just like, there's so much more good information in these books that they left. And we understand, you can't make a movie that's 5 hours long per book,
Sure.
but it's just there's a lot of extra information that it makes it more enjoyable. That like there's happy endings for I'm a big I like black and white, good versus evil. It's fun when there's a twist, but I like for the resolution to be the bad guys got what they deserved and the good guys won.
Yeah.
And so it's yeah, that very much, if you read the books, they definitely tie everything up a lot better than the
Well, and you
movies.
mentioned that about your book as well, and I immediately thought, okay, this is one I'm going to have my husband and my son read together because my husband's always trying to show my son that as well, like with these, like this is the ultimate like good versus evil movie, and like you really need to watch this, and that's really important.
My wife kind of gets a little not annoyed, but maybe a little irritated because I've been on this kind of thing lately about like Disney. For some reason, they seem to have to make every bad guy like, oh, well, they're not really bad. They're just, they had a rough life. And I'm like, that's fine for adults. For children, You need black and white.
Yeah. Their brains can't handle the nuance.
Yeah, it's like the nuance is just going to confuse them, and they're I just it bothers me when they try to make every bad guy relatable. I'm like, no, you want to be the good guy. You don't want to be like, oh, well, the bad guy, he was only bad because they were mean to him. It's like, yes. Also, the good guy would make the choice to be good in spite of somebody being mean to them. Like that's really bothered me lately, where Disney seems to want to make, oh, everybody's good. It's like, no, that's not how the world works.
Yeah. I think they would call it like these morally gray characters I hear people talk about, right? Of like this kind of in between. And again, like our kids just can't understand that nuance. Mm-hmm. So, well, what is the second book you brought today for your book flight?
The second book that I brought is, like I said, Star Wars. I've always been the biggest Star Wars fan. And so I picked Fate of the Jedi.
Okay.
The first, was not a 9-book series, I believe.
Okay.
This is the first one, Outcast.
Perfect.
And the funny thing about Star Wars that a lot of people don't know, especially unless you've actually got into the Star Wars books, is there's this whole section of books called Star Wars Legends, which was stuff that was all written after George Lucas wrote all the Star Wars movies and before Disney purchased Star Wars.
Oh, okay.
And there's so many great books. So the Fate of the Jedi books, it takes place years later. It has all your favorite characters from Star Wars: Luke, Leia, Han Solo. But it goes further, and Luke actually has children.
Oh, cool!
And it's just it's funny because they've made these terrible new movies and shows with Star Wars, and all of us Star Wars fans that have read the books is like, you had so much content to work with.
Yeah,
because there's literally probably hundreds of books that have been written for Star Wars, after Episode 3. That not all of them are good, but a lot of them are excellent.
Wow. I had no idea. Like, I'm one person that had no idea these existed.
Yeah, there's tons. Like I said, this one's a 9-book series, and it's just one of the reasons I like it is the same thing. It's, you get into the story. It's funny because if you were to read it today, you're going to think it's oddly relevant because they bring in, there's a lot of political persecution against Luke and the Jedi Order, and they want to get rid of him and whatnot. So it's oddly relevant on the political side. But then at the same time, there's just this, the same as all the Star Wars stories, is there's this underlying story of good versus evil.
Yeah.
There's this new overarching bad guy, which you kind of meet in the first book, but you just see them throughout all 9 books that ends in this big epic battle, to essentially save the Jedi Order and also the universe. And so it's a really, really cool series. And it's a shame that no one knows about these books. Yeah. There was a lot of controversy because when Disney bought Star Wars, they just decided to stop paying a lot of the authors. They just decided that they didn't want these books to exist anymore because they're not them. So they just tried to completely get rid of them. But you can still find them online, Amazon, all that.
Okay.
There's so many cool stories. And for the most part, I can't think of any that are really inappropriate for children.
Okay.
Not children, but young adults, I guess I would say.
Okay.
There's still some violence. There's, like I said, Luke has a son, and it's because he meets a girl, gets married and whatnot. So there's some romance, but there's nothing I would say that's like even, maybe some of the violence might get PG-13 level. Okay. But as far as like the romance, that's very PG. As far as, the language is still, Star Wars has never really sworn, and that's because they kind of make up their own swears. that, doesn't matter. So it's one of the things where, if you were to ask me today, I tried to read some of the Star Wars Disney books, and they're just filled with political content, I guess. Okay. The best way to put it, without
the most G way to say it.
Without getting too offensive. And it was just, it was just sad because it was every book it was the main theme throughout the books.
Yeah.
I as someone who would read every time a new book would come out, I would get it immediately, and I would read it. It was very sad that at one day I just had to make the decision where I'm like, Star Wars is dead. I can't I can't buy any of their new content. It's not written well. It's got too much stuff in there that I'm not comfortable with. And so, but if like, especially if your kids are really into fantasy, the older Star Wars books, Star Wars Legends, like I said, this series, Fate of the Jedi, is excellent.
All right, well, perfect. So we'll have those. We'll include links for those. And then lastly, for your book flight, we have the Solar Storm Chronicles to go with it. So new heroes. So
yeah, you can tell very much from the story that the bad guy, Kyle, I don't give him any redeeming features. He is a bad guy.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. We need to beat the bad guy.
Okay.
And I think, like, he's just a bad guy. He's very intelligent. He wins a lot because there has to be conflict. Like,
sure.
It was just easy to beat him. It's an interesting book. So yeah, he's highly intelligent. He's highly evil. There's some parts in there where you're just like, that's horrible. And it's like, yeah, that's what bad guys do.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where I wanted to go with it, and I wanted to write the story of, there's a bad guy, and we're gonna do the right thing no matter what. I try to put in. A lot of people ask me, like, so are you a Christian author, or was a Christian author? And I'm like, well, my book is written morals. It's not a Christian book about Christian things.
Yeah,
there are things in there that you would be like, okay, this person clearly, because he was raised, in the Christian way.
Sure.
And that was important to me to kind of, especially with like adult theme. Every book you read nowadays, the guy and the love and sleep together. And I'm like, I live in a Christian household. That is not what we believe should happen.
Yeah.
We reserve that for marriage.
Sure.
And so I in the book and try to do it in a way where, this is a relatable character, and he's making a decision to, forego those sorts of things to, keep his morals. And it was important to me to kind of try to give an example, because I just don't see any of that anymore.
Yeah.
It's hard for me, especially in books, TV too. It's just like, oh no, they fell in love and now they, together. It's like, I don't agree with that, and it's hard to find stuff with that sort of content nowadays.
Absolutely. Totally agree. So, well, listeners, go grab a copy of the Solar Storm Chronicles New Heroes, and you can check out more of this. I'm going to call it a good versus evil book flight, because I feel like that's truly what this is. So how I love to end our show here is just with our bonus pairings, which are a speed round of questions. So you can answer these really quick. And you've already answered this first one. Are you a rereader?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I reread Lord of the Rings every year, and then there's several. Harry Potter, Chronicles of Narnia, all the classics I reread all.
Yeah. Okay. And then what is one book you've read that has changed your life?
I'd probably say American Sniper.
Okay.
It's the story of, I don't know if you've heard, it's Chris Kyle.
Chris Kyle, yeah.
Navy SEAL. It was kind of one of my first delves into biographies.
Okay.
And because I just never really had an interest. I was like, I don't really care about these random people, history's lives. But someone suggested to me reading that just because I'm very, very pro-military, very pro-America. If you watch the movie, the book is not like the movie.
Okay.
The book is actually co-written by Chris Kyle. I think he had a ghostwriter to help him out because he's not a writer. But so it's written effective. It's his story. Where the movie is, it's telling the story.
Yeah.
And, it's not for kids. It's definitely for adults. It's a hard book to read. It gives you a good realization of what they went through over there in release and mediation for them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Okay. And then where is your favorite place to read?
my truck, probably.
Okay.
I feel like I have most time.
Yeah. You get a spot to do it in there. So, all right. And then lastly, what are you reading next?
What am I reading next? Currently, my wife likes, it was called Aragon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she was really into that. So get that and check that out. So that's what I'm currently reading. We're on the first one.
Okay.
It's a 4 or 5 book series. So that's what I'm currently reading. And it kind of goes with that fantasy, good versus evil kind of theme that I really get into.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know your time is precious and I appreciate all you've given me.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with E.H. Underhill and his book flight of Good versus Evil books. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information about today's book flight or other books that we talked about. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Your review not only helps the show, but it also helps the podcast to reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure you will not miss an episode. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.